Hello, who am I? I am Sumita. My pronouns are she, they. I am a brown person with medium-ish brownish hair, and I'm wearing a red dress, a black top. I've got glasses, blue lipstick, a grey owl necklace, and a colourful starry headband. I'm an autistic creative expressor researcher person. I'm also Indoor Goblin, which is a space, a being, a traveling land that I explore through and perform with and as and in. This presentation is about psychoeducation through exploring inner worlds. I'll explain a bit about how I use inner worlds and about outering inner worlds as a creative psychoeducational tool. I'm sharing some of my personal processes, not because I just want to sit here and talk about myself, but because learning and self-observing about these processes myself made me wonder about how these things could be useful to think about when considering how another person might benefit from these tools, whether or not they currently engage in creative things yet, and even if they're quite different from me. Also with this, I want to express the importance or the value of establishing creative spaces for autistic-led expression of inner dialogues for communication, understanding, mental wellness, and being. As always, I invite you to be in this shared space in whatever way that means for you, and to connect in whichever ways you feel comfortable, whether that's through the words or the sounds or the shapes or the energies. The multi-tangly sensory mind style, which I understand the world and the things in it through, has offered me various imagination tools, which have helped me to communicate with myself and others through creativity. These imagination tools involve inner mind characters, inner mind worlds, and also the type of communication connection I have with the world energies around me, with objects or places or entities. It's an unwordable essence involving human, non-human, more than human, universal resonance. This sensing style aligns with perspective flavors of queer ecologies, and also with Dr. Dawn Joy Leong's explorations of elemental empathy, uniting what she describes as sensory-based connectivity with elemental material reciprocity, I think that's how you say it. In her PhD exploring autism, parallel embodiment, and elemental empathy, she writes, "For the autistic with hypersenses and detail-focused cognition, every connection and interaction between self and other, whether human or non-human, between sense, sensibility, and the elemental material dimension, is akin to the inevitable act of inhaling and exhaling." This description of continuous inhaling and exhaling resonates with my multidimensional cycle spheres of inner to outer world traveling, which for me is a key part of my self-learning, art-sharing, being experience. Just like inhaling and exhaling, I am constantly innering, outering on multi-levels. I believe this was always a part of my unconscious experience as a human, but which also became an elevated conscious experience initiated by creative expression through the arts and performance. And through this experience, I'm able to shift through different characters, essences, thought flavors, to observe and perform and to reshape my self-learnings and self-feelings in a way that positively influences my mental well-being, my physical well-being, my understanding of myself and the world, and myself in the world, and my permission to be. Outering the inners is how I describe expressing or outputting internal worlds or thoughts. A part of this process is what my brain words call unjumbling the mind jelly, which involves a living translation process of internal problem solving and external expression. I gave this process of unjumbling permission to be through the creation of an observation space. Here's the first piece of writing I wrote publicly as Sumita Unjumbled some years ago. My brain is a jelly, a fizzy, scribbly jelly of confused, twisted, tangled jumblement. So many jellies within one jelly, each jelly their own unique jelly, yet all belonging to the jelly as a whole. Which jelly holds the truest form? Which jelly is the false absorber? I fear the answer's all and none. Blend them all and call it jam. Freeze the jam and call it jelly. Jelly frozen. Jelly speechless. jelly shy without a sound. Melt the droplets, evaporate, refine, reseparate. Repeat the jelly process with newfound learnings, self-discoveries, new positivities, and probably new doubts. And as my sugar worlds and bitter worlds may swirl and intermingle, I must dance with them and sing and paint and write, translating jelly shapes, invisible recrystallized, jelly out, rejamify and jelly in, rejellified, jelly unjumbled, jelly refined, jelly unjellied, rejellied inside. This thing about the jam becoming a jelly and the jelly melted into a jam again and then reformed into a jelly was what I now understand as being about outering inners, regellifying, rejamifying, re-innering outers, re-outering inners. There's an expanded understanding and communication that comes with that repeated process. To re-outer or to re-inner is, for example, how I describe what happens after a performance or a creative activity. The experience can be re-internalized, further explored, and then re-outed again, which means the experience can also be transformed throughout the unfolding of self-learning layers. I recognize this as a psychoeducational experience. My MSc Creative Arts and Mental Health dissertation, which I did at Queen Mary University of London, explored the creative process behind the TV show Pablo as a psychoeducational tool for self-understanding, social awareness, and mental wellness. I wrote that by psychoeducation, I mean learning about the self in order to provide a way of communicating and understanding with self and other. This also involves enabling the possibility of intervening or solution building for any difficulties that may arise, though equally growing awareness of non-difficulties and joy. Pablo is a preschool show on CBeebies by Paper Owl Films. It's about an autistic child named Pablo who uses their inner art world to process, problem solve, and play, thinking and expressing through the varying inner imagination friends called the book animals, which coexist within him. These different book animal characters present different parts of Pablo, and while sometimes conflicting, together they all make up who he is. This awareness of inner multiplicity, to me, is what makes the show a useful model that can be used for autistic-led psychoeducation for autistic people. Psychoeducation for young autistic people is often delivered from a non-autistic perspective, influenced by non-autistic societal views, which can often be dismissive and or unhelpful to instinctual creative autistic processing. For example, thinking through inner world characters is often pathologized as dissociation, and communicating through metaphor and imaginary play outside of playtime or in adults is often discouraged, being associated with childishness. But as a creative autistic adult who processes in this way, I rely on these metaphorical inner realities, not just to dissociate, but also to associate with the outer world, to make connections, to communicate with myself, to figure out how I feel and what I think. This was also something described by participants of my study. I interviewed some of the writers and actors of Pablo about their imagination worlds. And whilst there were descriptions of the imagination being used for escapism, there was also the opposite of using inner worlds to integrate themselves into the world by in some way bringing the inside out. I wrote that the impact of this was self-expression, enhanced social experiences, creative autistic joy. It offered communication, ways of relating, friendships, acceptance of being autistic, all significant factors for enhanced mental wellness. Performing this research not only highlighted the importance of autistic imagination and creativity, it also, to me, dismantled something about stereotypical presentation styles of imagination and of creative autistic people. For example, when thinking about fact-based solo roleplay as being an imaginative activity, such as someone enjoying reading a bus timetable instead of a storybook as a way to imaginatively explore. It also reminded me about the diversity of imagination and the diversity of creative autistic people, and also the unexpected, surprising similarities that can exist within people beyond seemingly contrasting presentation styles and differing life experiences. This is something that resonates with me about the documentary film The Reason I Jump, which to me emphasizes an urge to unite conversations between different types of autistic people of similar yet different yet similar autistic communication styles, and to be open to reassessing what we know about autism and autistic beingness. through exploring how our inner worlds relate. Whilst I learned to better understand and interact through inner worlds as a self-coping and struggling adult, had these imagination tools been usefully established when I was a child, I might have had much earlier support and intervention. Writing stories for Pablo involved consciously engaging in an inner art world whilst internally role-playing as Pablo, thinking about how each different part of me would be reacting to a scenario. This led me to consider how initiating or encouraging this style of creative storytelling play could help children and adults to create a base for translating, expressing, and communicating, to invite an inner to outer creative experience. The ways that I use imagination tools for mental wellness includes performance, music, and writing. And I want to emphasize, when encouraging others to use creative tools, that the focus of these activities are on building a safe communication tool and energy exchange, creating a place where a communication exchange can be invited rather than trying to be really skilled at a thing and focusing on that. It's also important for me to have non-wordy ways of expressing and also other wordy ways of expressing, that is, to use the words that I understand to better reflect my experience. My indoor goblin world space, for example, offers a place where I only need to communicate in my own languages without having to explain what I mean by certain words. And when I do use words through that space, it's the worlds behind the words that are most important to me. I also need to mention that there are so many layers of translation, whether in words, non-words, other words, or a mixture. This reminds me of the writing process for The Party, which was a short virtual reality film by Lucy Hawking, directed by Anrik Bregman and Shahani Fernandez at the Guardian VR. I wrote the dialogue for Layla, a recently diagnosed autistic teenage girl at a family party. This involved translating and expressing an internal experience into something that could be shared. I did this through typing my responses whilst imagining experiencing the scenario that was presented. It was a translating through typing experience of inner mind exploration, which I identify as being psychoeducational, because for me, typing out thoughts is an altering inners process. It helps the non-words turn into non-word words and the non-word words to turn into words in a sort of subconscious play experience. Whilst communicating my inner worlds is an important part of my current beingness, I don't want to assume that everybody wants to communicate their inner things in the ways that I do. However, I didn't know that I wanted to communicate these things either until I created the environments that allowed these things to begin communicating. My enthusiasm for engaging in this process is through finding value in this process and for my own personal healing journeys, and simply because it's the only way I know how to be as a person on the planet. But what I think is the most important to me in terms of helping other people to outer their inner worlds is to encourage facilitating self-expression in people's own inner world style languages, wordily or non-wordily, to invite the mind unjumbling, to invite the inner to outer, outer to inner jam jelly experience, and to use these worlds as a basis of communication and connection, or just as a safe, living, creative space by which to be understood by self or other. Thank you for listening.